eBay Motors and Fox Racing welcome you to episode 58 of the Lowdown Show. I'm Neil Graham. In this episode, I continue my conversation with traveler and author Sam Manicom. Sam will be reading excerpts from his book, Into Africa. And if you like what you hear, head back to episode 57 to catch up on what you missed. But before we take a leap, a word from those who make the Lowdown possible. Picture this, you're halfway through a DIY motorcycle fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realize you're missing a part. Well, it's okay because you know whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got everything. Brake rotors, lights, and tire exhaust systems, whatever you need. And it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers and hoping you ordered the right thing. All the parts you need at prices you'll love, guaranteed to fit every time. eBay. Things people love. In over 50 years of connecting riders to dirt, Fox Racing has learned that the best gear always has a discernible purpose and a strong point of view. The Ranger, Defend, and Recon Adventure Collection takes a minimalist approach to product design, with a clear mission of providing everything you need in adventure-ready gear and absolutely nothing you don't need. Minimalist chassis, fully seam-sealed with Gore-Tex waterproofing and D3O CE level protection across the board. This gear is every bit as pure as the adventure you're chasing.
I want to take us from back into Kenya from Uganda. I'd been arrested in Uganda and pretty much thrown out. I seem to be getting a habit of doing this, but I was so happy to be back in Kenya. I really enjoyed Uganda. The north is, so much of it is desert, scrubland, and so on, and there was a lot of trouble up there. And down in the south, it's forested and terraced hillsides and corrugated iron roofs, so the villages look rusty when you're looking down at them from the top, amidst the lushness of the banana plantations and so on. So it's quite beautiful. The reason that I got kicked out was because when I was given in the last story what I thought was 3 months permit to stay in the country, I didn't check. What a classic stupid overlander's mistake.
Let me guess, 3 weeks?
I'd been given 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
And I didn't discover that until I was way over it. And anyway, there's another story there. But I was very lucky to get away with that one. But it was a tense moment, let's put it like that.
Well, let me jump in here. How serious, for those of us, or for those who may be considering something like this, how significant is that? Because sometimes you travel and you run over a little bit and you know the customs kind of give you a evil stare, but it's not really a big deal. But in your experience, is how serious a transgression is that?
I think every overlanding motorcyclist should try and obey the rules of the country that they're in, and visas is something that's very important. Having said that, stuff happens, and for the best plans possible, you break down, or you might get an opportunity that you'll never get again. So you think, all right, I'll have a go at that for 2 weeks and take my chance at the border. At the border crossings, I did overrun my visa a few times, and I was never treated badly, but I often wondered whether, having left that country, and if I applied for a visa for it again, whether I would be allowed back in with a new visa. So there is the risk of that side of things.
Right.
In this particular instance, it was because I'd ended up working for an aid agency down close to the border with Rwanda, and things were kicking off in Rwanda. It was that time. I was going to sleep at night time, hearing machine gun fire, and that sort of stuff. So I was riding away from the border with a war-torn country, and of course, somebody who hasn't got the right paperwork is going to get instantly nabbed. So it was unfortunate, but I was fortunate, lucky in my unluckiness.
Right.
But it was nice to be back in Kenya. Coming across the border from Uganda back into Kenya, I decided that I was going to stay at the new Lincoln Inn again. I knew where it was. I knew that they had off-road parking, and it was a convenient distance from the border, etc., etc. I'm a great believer in doing border crossings first thing in the morning if I possibly can, because if the officials want to play games with me, then they can play games with me all day until they get bored and just say, oh, for goodness sake, go away. And that normally means go into the country with the right rubber stamps. I also like crossing the borders first thing in the morning because it's cooler in hot countries, and because the officials haven't been jaded by all of the hassle from other people who are trying to cross the border. So it's a good time to cross. Um, I try and find somewhere to stay that is not too far into the country that I'm heading into, so that if games have been played, then I have a clue as to where I'm going to go. It doesn't always work out, but it's a clue. And sometimes you get asked those questions when you're crossing a border, so it's really handy to be able to say, I'm going to Eldoret and I'm going to stay at the New Lincoln Inn. So anyway, I was really happy to be back amongst the flower gardens and with the swimming poolside bath. So here the chapter carries on. The New Lincoln's manager recommended a barber's. It was a colonial museum piece. Outside hung a superb example of the traditional red and white striped pole, and the glass half window held faded black and white photos from the 1930s with Western haircuts. The walls inside were hung with gilt-edged, rather fly-blown wall-to-wall mirrors, but the chairs were the real feature. I'd only ever seen white enamel swivel-based chairs like these in a movie. The red leather covers were a little ragged and very faded, but they were highly polished, and the white-jacketed barber snapped the blades of his scissors opened and closed as if eager to get started. Well, he did a really good job using an enormous comb that no doubt had last been used to tease out the knots from crinklier hair than mine, and a shiny pair of hand clippers. With memories of my mother's determined short back and sides with similar clippers, I sat with fingers crossed. As a bush town mission station 9-year-old, I knew nothing of fashion, but never liked having my hair cut. This time, all went well until the barber said, "Beard?" To which I nodded without thinking. I walked out of that dash of history with a very white chin that glared visibly through the stubble the barber had been kind enough to leave. That evening, after dinner, some of the local men and their girlfriends invited me to join them for a few rounds in the bar. The debate swirled over such important matters as which beer has the more strength, White Cap or Tusker? Which girls from which bar were the prettiest? And they wanted to know if I was completely mad to be riding a piki through Africa. Piki is Swahili for motorcycle, presumably because of the noise that small local motorbikes made. Piki. Didn't I know that it was dangerous? And how often had I had to pay a bribe so far? That was an awkward one. The truth of the matter was none. But by that time I knew, of course, that these men lived in a world where not a lot was got done without a fair spreading of palm grease. It felt right to change the subject without answering, so I bought another round instead. Breakfast was a good old-fashioned English spread that was served in the cool flower gardens by the maroon-jacketed waiter who called me sir. Sitting there, already togged out in my dusty, oily bike gear, I almost had to check that it was me he was talking to. He bought me porridge, bacon and eggs, toast and marmalade, and for a splash of local colour, some very good papaya that was decorated with a slice of lemon and a bright red hibiscus flower. This all made for a superb start to a blue sky day. I'd learned pretty quickly to hit the road in the early hours of the day. It's a lot more fun to ride a piki in the cool. By midday, the asphalt is almost at melting point, and the heat hammers up at you off the black surface. You can imagine what happens to your tyre wear at those temperatures. And something else I'd learned by now was that my concentration wasn't at its best when I was slowly cooking in my leather jacket. My 6 a.m. breakfast in the garden got me on the road for 7, which would give me at least 3 hours of cooler temperatures to ride in. The low, softer morning light was better for taking photos, and there was a much greater chance of seeing wildlife around that also takes advantage of the cool to feed and move. At the usual checkpoint a few kilometres down the road, a long line of traffic waited. 2 matatus, or minibuses, were overloaded as usual, with their drivers finger-tapping at the delay. They formed the tail of the queue. Matatu drivers are a traditional target for palm grease, so I suspected that the finger-tapping might have had a tinge of frustration to it. The policeman indicated to the first driver to pull over, and an argument had started. Suddenly, one of the officers walked around to the back of the minibus, and using his rifle butt, he smashed one of the tail lights on one side. Back at the cab, money changed hands. The driver was now legal in this policeman's eyes and free to go. At least, that is, until the next checkpoints, where the broken tail lights would cause more problems. Then it was my turn. Another policeman directed me out of the line of traffic. I stopped the bike, pulled off my gloves and my helmet, and sat waiting. The extremely smart officer strode arrogantly over and stared at me from underneath his the extremely smart police officer strode arrogantly over and stared at me from above the razor-sharp creases in his trousers. He had a semi-automatic rifle slung over his shoulder, and he didn't say a word, just watched me from below the patent rim of his hat. Not being able to see his eyes and the rim's shadow made him feel really menacing, and he strutted around the bike. After a few moments that felt like ages, he demanded abruptly, "Where are you coming from?" "Eldoret," I told him, wanting to keep things simple. "No, before that," he snapped. I began to wonder if there was some sort of sting about to occur. Was my paperwork from the border in order or not? I'd no choice but to tell him. "Uganda." "I know," he stated, but by then he was stroking the bike with what I thought was boyish admiration. He then looked up and said, "What is this?" A BMW motorcycle," I replied, not quite knowing what else to say. "No," he said, "this is a car on two wheels," and burst out laughing. "Ha ha, fooled you, didn't I?" He just stopped me for a chat. I mean, he really put the willies at me. I was absolutely sure. And normally, as somebody who's very obviously a tourist on a motorcycle, you would, and this far away from, you would get way through border, checkpoints and things like that. But this time to get pulled over and that close to the border, because I'd ridden away from the border thinking, cool, that was really easy. Did they really check all of my paperwork properly? And I'd actually stopped a couple of miles away from the border to check through that I'd got all of my paperwork and that it had all been stamped in the right places.
Right.
But I still had that tinge of nervousness. So to get stopped this time, but this guy, as soon as he'd sort of stopped teasing me, I said to him, "Do you want to have a ride?" and pointed at the back of my bike. And he said, "What, me? On this?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely." Within seconds, his hat and his machine gun were in the hands of one of his colleagues, and he was on the back of the bike, and he and I blasted up and down the road for, I don't know, 20, 30 kilometers, something like that, as fast as I possibly could on the potholes. And all I could hear was him laughing on the back of the bike. And when we got back to the police checkpoint, he got off the bike and he was strutting around amongst, it was just such fun. Was that a bribe? No, I don't think so. It was just good fun.
You also have to think, I think, from their perspective that, day after day of a fairly monotonous job, and
Yeah.
and all of a sudden there's this anomaly shows up, this pasty white guy with the kind of motorcycle that's rarely seen
Yeah.
in that part of the world. And yeah, I mean, can you blame him?
No, not at all. And it was it was just one of those high moments of the trip going down through Africa, because yeah, he'd got a great sense of humor and he knew exactly which buttons to push on me with all his experience on these checkpoints. He actually told me that he'd been on the other side of Eldoret the night before and he'd seen me come through. And he knew that I wouldn't be riding on past Eldoret because it was that time of day. So he knew that I'd stay in a hotel in Eldoret, and so he'd specifically asked for posting at the first checkpoint on the other side of the city so that he could catch me.
Oh, that's funny.
Just brilliant, hey?
That's really clever. Your recollections of border crossings. I mean, I don't think I've ever crossed a border, even returning to my home country where they sort of have to let me in. There's always that little thing that kind of gnaws away at you, isn't it? I don't know what is it. The authority is it? I don't know if I just feel guilty because think I'm doing something wrong, even when I'm not. But there's always a degree of unease, isn't there?
Oh, there is, always. I think that for me, it comes because I've got a lot riding on being allowed to come into a country. The next months of travel are all about and being allowed in, and the things that I want to be able to see and to do, the experiences that I want to have. And to be turned around at a border can be just absolutely catastrophic and incredibly expensive, because then you're going to have to find a way to get around that country, aren't you? Either shipping your bike or air freighting it. And that can eat into an awful lot of fuel money. So, yeah.
And there really isn't an official appeals process at the border, is it? I mean, it's
No.
literally up to the whim of the one person that you meet that day, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I think part of the key of doing a border crossing is being prepared. Do your homework, find out what paperwork that you need. And now it's so easy to do that. You go to the embassy, to the website of the embassy of the
Yeah.
country that you're going to, and they tell you exactly what you need. And the chance of getting a little bit of that being requested decreases quite dramatically, because you can print out, these are the documents that you need, and these are how many copies that you need. Whereas in the past, you would pull up to a border and, you only have 5 copies. You must have 6. And you head off down to the brother's, cousin's, uncle's photocopy shop, where you get charged an arm and a leg because that's the only photocopier, all of this sort of stuff. So that side of things has disappeared. And I think, it works if you possibly can to start the border crossing, having had a good night's sleep, not last thing in the day, because the officials know if you're there last thing in the day, well, you've put yourself under pressure, haven't you? Because there's only maybe a couple of hours left before the border closes. So why do it? Having said that, I did hear the story about a couple. You remember I said earlier on about planning to go down the west side of Africa. I heard a story about a couple who had made it to the southernmost edge of Algeria, and they were about to go into the next country. But they were already fans of crossing borders when they're not knackered from a day's riding. So they had found somewhere to stay. They'd gone to sleep, gone to the border in the morning. The border was closed. If they had only gone through the night before, and they didn't have enough money in their travel budget to go back through Algeria, back through Europe, and then to try going down through Eastern Africa. So that was it. Their trip was over. But I still think that they actually made the right decision, because I hear more stories of people getting problems trying to do it last thing in the day.
And border towns, I was thinking about this recently. I mean, border towns always have a strange feel to them, don't they? There's something about them. I've never been anywhere in the world where they felt like a normal functioning sort of, town. There's always something a little bit. What is that? What is that feeling?
I kind of like this sensation that you're describing, and I don't do it at nighttime, because at nighttime in a place like that, then you're asking for trouble. But if I found myself somewhere to stay, then I'll go out and wander around for 2 or 3 hours, however long the daylight is. That gives me the chance to find my feet, to explore the lay of the land, to find a cheap supermarket, to stock up on food, because that way you're rolling into the next country, having used up the last of your money almost, because you always want a little just in case you've got a palm to grease. I never have, even today, ever paid a bribe. But being prepared, that makes sense. But I love walking around and seeing the shady deals being done on street corners, and watching where the prostitutes are hanging out, and going to looking at the bus station and the truck station, and all of the things that are going on at those places. Finding the petrol station and getting filled up for the last time, and you can pick up an awful lot from a gas station at a border as to what the mood of a place is, just by watching the people that are milling around at that gas station. It's where a lot of people hitch rides from on buses and trucks and in private transport and so on in developing world countries. So I actually quite enjoy the whole mood. But after dark, no way.
The Lowdown Show is presented by adbrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. 2 to go. Beautiful. Where are we now?
Okay, so the next one is from a village in Kenya. So I have just realized that I am no longer afraid of dirt roads. Now, bearing in mind that I was such a complete novice when I set off, I was afraid of every single dirt road that I rode through for the first months. I knew that I could kill myself. I knew that I could badly injure myself. So really, it was just a case of get on with them because there was not an alternative. But one
I'm
day,
going to jump in here for a second.
Hmm.
Now, did you seek any sort of guidance in terms of your riding, or did you just go? Did you consult guidebooks on how to ride in the dirt, or was it really just trial by fire?
There were very, very few books around about riding on corrugations and riding in sand and things like that. And the few magazines that there were that were publishing travel stories, they weren't talking that much about those sorts of things. They were talking about the places been and those sorts of things and how the bike fared and people met and so on. So I was very green, and with hindsight, the one big mistake that I made before I left was not getting any off-road training. It would have made such a huge difference, and I would have spent an awful lot less time afraid. I don't know whether afraid is the right word. Extremely wary, perhaps. And when you're a total novice at some things, extremely wary is a good idea because that's your spidey senses saying, wake up, pay attention. You're about to do something that you haven't got a clue about. But the thing is, if you treat those situations not with fear but with respect, then the chances are actually you'll get through them really well, because fear for me is, I actually quite like being afraid, because it's telling me, hey,
Well, it's
wake up.
serving a purpose, isn't it?
It really is. It really
Yes.
is. Fear is not something to be afraid of, if you're with me. It's something to be respected. And that's relevant to this story, because I had just realized that I was no longer afraid of riding dirt roads. And all of a sudden, a wealth of possibilities were opened up to me. All of these side turnings on my map that I'd been seeing and finding, okay, well, that's a single track, badly potholed road by the looks of this map. I'll take that because at least there's some asphalt. All of a sudden, I'm now on gravel roads. And I'm realizing that actually gravels are done so easier to ride than pothole beat up roads where you're slaloming all over the place. Yeah, so anyway, this story is, I'm heading up into northern Kenya, not with fear, but with a smile and with respect. And yeah, it was a fantastic feeling. The weather was perfect. You couldn't wish for better weather from a motorcyclist point of view, and I was feeling really good.
Let's take a short break for a few words from our sponsors. Picture this: you're in the garage, your favorite room in the house, and you're tuning up your engine with parts that you found on eBay. Every piece is just locking perfectly into place. You step back to admire your work, hands covered in grease. And because you're committed to riding that thing farther than the odometer can even handle, you start thinking to yourself, you know what? I could also use some new brakes, a shock. This baby deserves a new air filter. So you head straight back to eBay. You can find any part you need there. It's unreal, from headlights to air filters to exhaust systems, all the way to those carbon fiber rims you've had in your mind. eBay is the stocked garage of your dreams. And you've got eBay Guaranteed Fit, because eBay knows DIY fixes can be major and mods are always intense. So you need to know those parts are guaranteed to fit every time before you dive in wrench first. And on the off chance you order a part and it doesn't fit, send it back. Simple as that. You know what you love more than your bike itself, and that is, of course, riding it. You're serious when it comes to engine maintenance and locked in when you're headed into a build. And that's exactly why you start with eBay. Minor fix or complete overhaul. You want to get your ride back in the road, and you've got eBay Guaranteed Fit. So eBay created My Garage, where all you have to do is add your ride's info to get the exact parts that fit. When you see that green check, you're a click away from that part clicking perfectly into place. So now that you know all of this, just imagine standing at that open garage door, looking at the bike you love more than anything, knowing that anything is possible, whether it's keeping it on the road forever or turning it into something that's never been on the road before. Because with eBay, your garage just got a whole lot bigger. Get all the parts you need at prices you'll love, guaranteed to fit every time. eBay, things people love. In over 50 years of connecting riders to dirt, Fox Racing has learned that the best gear always has a discernible purpose and a strong point of view. The Ranger Defend and Recon Adventure Collection takes a minimalist approach to product design, with a clear mission of providing everything you need in adventure-ready gear and absolutely nothing you don't need. Minimalist chassis, fully seam sealed with Gore-Tex waterproofing, and D3O CE level protection across the board. This gear is every bit as pure as the adventure you're chasing. Now back to my conversation with Sam Manicom.
In the middle of the day, I sat in the cool of an acacia tree. It was a well-earned rest and the perfect spot to enjoy the view. Sweat had cling-filmed my shirt to my body, and my leather jacket was ringed with salt stains again. The foam around my goggles had a salty metallic scent to them, and the dust had gathered in muddy smears along the lower rims where perspiration would always collect. My eyes were drawn out over the shimmering brown and yellow of the plains towards the cool greens of the distant mountains. The sense of phenomenal space was quite awesome, and it was only after all these months in Africa that I was really beginning to feel inspired by them. In the first few months, I'd been too busy just coping with my immediate environment to really take stock of just how big this land is. I felt that I was in a place where I could yell at the top of my voice and for as long as I wanted, and not a soul would hear. Totally alone and at peace with the world, I was just wondering how far away the mountains were when suddenly a voice behind me made me jump. "Where are you coming from?" it said. It seemed that everywhere in the world was someone's backyard. It was a good thing that I hadn't been having a good old yell after all. The man's questions were as predictable as anything, so I could reel off the usual answers without thinking too hard. England, 43 litres, 800cc, several months. Uganda, Nairobi, and tonight I'll stay somewhere in the hills. But I didn't mind that people asked me questions, and several times I wondered if I would have the interest or even the courage in my own country to go and ask a total stranger these sorts of questions about their life. Here, the questions weren't nosy. They were a combination of curiosity and the desire to learn, and a sort of innocence. That night, an elder gave me permission to put my tent up next to his village. After the initial crowd had collected, stared, dawdled, and eventually decided that there was nothing new to see, I was left alone. It was the perfect opportunity to be a fly on the wall. Trying hard not to be caught staring, I watched the village scene. It seemed that, as I hadn't minded them watching me, they didn't appear to mind me watching them. Many of the men in the village carried small carved wooden stools, and they carried them as if they were extensions to their bodies rather than something to sit on. One of the elders had sociably come across and sat near to me on his stool, and he told me that I was right. There was much more to them than just something to sit on. Each stool could be hundreds of years old, and in fact, each was a family heirloom that was passed from generation to generation. As he talked, he smoked a cigarette which he had clasped between forefinger and thumb, so that the smoke wisped up between his yellowed fingers. He was obviously right-handed, and each long, glowing draw was conducted with amazing elegance and appreciation. He told me that the stool is the shrine of the family soul, and that each is decorated with family name and design. When the head of a family died, this symbol of authority would be passed to the next in line as an indication to all, the village and the tribe, that the power and responsibility were in new hands. A sort of African coat of arms, I thought. The old man's knowledge and knowledgeable calm impressed me, as did his clothing. He made me feel positively scruffy. I'd watched him come out of the low doorway of his mud and straw hut. He was immaculately clean with spotless dark trousers and a gleaming white creaseless shirt. I asked him if the village had a witch doctor. He replied, "Not this village, but the area certainly has a doctor. We must have one." He told me that, besides knowing vast amounts about the herbs and medicines of the land, the doctor was for many a spiritual leader and advisor. I also knew that some were dangerous. They know which of the hundreds of Africa's plants are poisonous and how long their poison would take to work. Historically, if you wanted to bump someone off, then for a fee, the doctor would either arrange it or give you the poison to do it. The favourite method was to dip the little finger in the poison and then, whilst serving a drink, dip the finger discreetly into the liquid. Doctoring the drink? But this man's doctor was also the teller of tales. I read before coming to Africa that in the days when few could read, word of mouth had been the way that traditions and history were passed on. The storytellers had almost photographic memories for these historic tales. Witch doctors were often seers too. One such seer dreamt of strangers coming out of the great waters to the east like yellow frogs. He dreamt that they would ride beasts with wings like butterflies, and that they would have magic sticks that would send out fire. The seer prophesied that some time would pass, and then these strangers would arrive in great snakes, whose skins would repel spears and arrows. The strangers would destroy them all. This story had been told for 3 generations before the explorers, slave traders, and colonialists had started to arrive. The great snake part of the prophecy had come true with the building of the railway from the port of Mombasa. I slept surrounded by the village noises until the heat of the early sun got me up and on the move. My deep green tent was perfect for hiding away in dark corners, but its dark colour sure did attract the heat. It only had one entrance, so I could never get a through draft, and on wet days it was too low to sit up in. I nicknamed it the space capsule because I had to slide in feet first. That was just such a horrible tent. It was absolutely wrong in every possible way that you could think of. But I'd chosen it because it was small and, well, I was only one person. What I hadn't realized, of course, is that your tent is your home. And yeah, you need, especially when you've got bike gear, you need at least a 2-person tent. And having a door on either end with mosquito netting so you can get a through draft, and a lighter color so it reflects heat, all of those sorts of things you learn as you travel, don't you? But that was a big mistake.
Yeah.
I actually had a chief in Tanzania, in a village that I was staying in. The chief, oh look, we've got a visitor about to pass through. Hi, Birgit.
And she
Um,
goes.
the chief asked if he could climb into my tent because he thought this was such a weird thing, and it took him ages to shuffle his way down in it, and eventually he had to be pulled out. And he looked at me and shook his head as if to say, "What planet have you come from?"
How uncivilized the English are.
Mhm.
That was a beautiful the story about the stool. I'd never heard anything like that. That's a really beautiful sort of talisman, isn't it, that they carry with them? And in something as humble as a stool, you'd never think of it, would you?
It's one of the reasons why, much as I love a GPS, I love using it for certain circumstances, and the rest I want to turn it off, and I want to bumble along, and I want to find places, and I want to be open to side turning opportunities. People say to me, "God, you covered an awful lot of miles when you were going around the world." But once I'd realized the freedom that my motorcycle was giving me, every time I saw a side turning that I thought, "Oh, that looks interesting," I'd head off down it and see what was down there. And I found tiny, remote little villages. And once you found the head person from the village, if you and you'd ask for permission to stay, they would say, "Yeah, sure, okay. We think you're a bit weird, but yeah, put your tent up over there." And once they said that to you, you were under the protection of the village chief, so
Right.
nobody was going to bother you. And like I mentioned in that piece, once you had that protection and you'd allowed people to be as nosy as they wanted with you, then you were allowed to be as nosy as you wanted with them. When I was traveling down through Africa, I painted quite a lot of watercolor paintings. And some of my best paintings were done just sitting on a pannier in one of those villages, painting the scene that I saw. Um, One of the saddest things about the journey down through Africa was that when I got to South Africa and supposedly a safe postal system, I posted those paintings home. They never made it, not one single one of them. There's only one that still exists, and that belongs to the owner of a backpackers hostel that I stayed with in Cape Town. And she and I became great friends, and I gave her that painting as a thank you present. And I like to think it's still on her wall.
Wow. Now, Sam, you sort of made reference a little bit tangentially to there's a certain ambivalence towards GPS, and of course, the span of the years of your travel much changed technology-wise. And in some of the travelers I've spoken to who did a lot of traveling in the pre-internet era, 80s and 90s and so on, um, it really changed how travelers travel. How has it affected you personally?
Um, in some ways, it's changed a lot, but in other ways, it hasn't. The lesson learned from map reading and planning on a map is still with me very strongly. I love the fact that when you get a map laid out on the floor in front of you, you can see all of the possibilities. And if you've got a good map, you can see where the contours are. You can see the names of quirky places off to one side. Going down to Africa, for example, Michelin maps, absolutely the best. There are three: one for the northwest, one for the northeast, and one for southern Africa, and they are absolutely superb to follow. And you can end up going to places like there was one place called Rainbow Bay. Well, I had to go to Rainbow Bay. Why was it called Rainbow Bay? Was it really full of all of the colors of the rainbow? And actually, it pretty much was. I was so pleased that I'd taken that side turning. Now, if I'd been doing my trip just by GPS, aiming to go from A to B, then I might not have even known that Rainbow Bay existed. And why was a place called Coffee Fountain? Well, I had to go and find out, didn't I? And all of those sorts of things. So I still plan with a map, and I use GPS to get out of towns and to get into towns, or if there's something specific that I want to see, because I can program that in. But normally, once I'm out of those circumstances, I know roughly which direction I'm going in, and if I get lost, so what? I'm just seeing stuff that I wouldn't have ordinarily seen, and that's where you find some of the best surprises, when you let serendipity take over. And I love that. For me, it's one of the beauties of the freedom of a motorcycle. I'm going to make one more comment on that, and that is one of the reasons that I travel with a motorcycle and I travel on a tight budget is because the time to have experience is what's more important to me than the number of beers that I drink and the niceness of the hotels that I can stay in. I want the road miles and I want the experiences that those budget places and being frugal with my spending can give me. I often don't have to pay to have a fantastic experience. I just have to be there, and something happens, and I ride away thinking, what a lucky bloke am I that I've just been. That was me in that situation. Me in that. Fantastic.
That's beautiful. We've come to our last excerpt. What's brewing for us?
Okay. So this section is way down now in southern Africa, and I want to take you through a little bit of Zambia and on into Namibia. Now, I hadn't planned to go through Namibia. I was aiming for Cape Town, and from Cape Town, at however long it took me to get through Africa, there I was going to make a plan somehow to go home, back to the UK, find a new job, and that was that. But the last months of traveling in southern Africa, I kept on asking myself, but is there a good reason to go home? And I could not think of one single good reason to go home, but I could think of lots of good reasons to keep going. I, by sheer fluke, managed to get myself booked on a container ship going from Durban in South Africa across to Sydney in Australia. And I had enough time, if I used my time carefully, to go up into Zambia and then across into Namibia before dropping down into South Africa, and then across to Durban. So, yeah, the clock was ticking me on me a little bit. So for the first time on this trip, other than the weather patterns or the length of my visa, I did have a clock ticking on me, but I had time to do Namibia some real justice. So yeah, I'd heard so many fantastic tales. I had to go. Here we go. A feathered alarm clock woke me early in the morning, and I was on my way by 7. The map said that the minor road to the border with Namibia was in poor condition. It hadn't been wrong. The road was 80% hole and 20% crumbling asphalt. A purely dirt road would have been a lot simpler to ride on, but it was far easier for me than it was for the cars and trucks. At least I only had 2 wheels to maneuver between the holes. One or other of a car's 4 wheels was bound to hit something, so they could only travel at half my speed and in half my comfort. I could have gone faster too, but decided to save strength and the bike. After a while, I was waved to a halt at a roadblock, a foot and mouth disease checkpoint. The overalled, Wellington-booted soldiers sprayed the bike and my hands were washed in chemicals. but the soles of my boots were missed. There'd been this sort of situation in so many times before in Africa. The good intention was there, but the training and therefore the understanding was not. It made me realise yet again how lucky I was to live in a first world country. The swift, muddy-covered river just below the border had no bridge, but a pontoon ferry that was tugged back and forth by rope. This was a first for me, and though the pontoon seemed rickety, we all made it across with ease. The small collection of border huts kept life simple, and the officials knew what to do. They showed no signs of wanting to play games, but this was the first time that my face and name were checked against the wanted posters. According to these, there were a lot of white-skinned villains around. The bald, bullet-headed officer, who instead of having 3 chins had 3 fat rings around the back of his neck, took his time. These whiteys all look the same was the irresistible thought that slipped into my mind before riding up the pale sand road into Namibia. The town of Katima Mulilo sprawled somewhat lethargically in the dust along the roadside. The beat-up old fuel station had petrol, so it made sense to fill up straight away. This could be my last chance for about 300 kilometers, and it would have been nuts to go back in the morning to find that they had none left. There were now just 7 weeks to make it to Durban, and that would have been a stupid delay. The petrol attendant told me that the best places to find someone to ride across the desert with would be the petrol station itself or the hotel. So I rode down to the other Zimbabwe lodge, where there was a camping site along the river's edge, a swimming pool, and a bar. Free bush camping would have been possible, but with all the stories that were floating around about the border area, it was an additional risk that didn't seem worthwhile. Another thought that made sense was that the bar would be a good place to hunt out someone to ride with. I'd learnt enough about Africa by this time to know that deserts shouldn't be ridden alone unless there was no choice. Unless you were very good, and my riding style still couldn't be described as being that. No luck in the bar that night or for the next 4 nights, and the traffic at the petrol station seemed to be only moving locally or back into Zambia. The drivers gave me conflicting reports about the track, and some told me that under no circumstances should it be done solo. There were too many dangerous people, the road was in very bad condition for long sections, and if I broke down, it could be days before anyone found me. Others said that it was very hard going, but having made it down this far down through Africa, then I ought to make it. Another driver advised that, except for about 50 kilometers, the going was good gravel. Now that was more like it. These 50 kilometers seemed to be the trouble zone that all the stories had in common, and the sand and gravel were white. If and when eventually riding the track, the glare was going to make life hard. Back on the island of Jersey where I'd started this trip, the local motocross shop had sold me polarized lenses for my goggles. I'd nearly dumped them on several occasions, but had never been able to bring myself to do that. The lenses were going to be very handy now, but there was still no one to ride with. The hotel campsite was eating a hole in my budget, and the sailing date was getting ever closer, and I didn't know who to believe about the road. At the rate I was going, I could have sat there for weeks, so I tossed a coin. Heads. Go for it on my own, and with care it should be okay. I had learnt a lot since February, and anyway, I did have my guardian angel, didn't I? I told the police what I was doing and that I'd report in on the other side. They appeared to be quite easy with the plan, so I was set. The first gentle glow of sunrise lit up the soft trail of dust as the bike was swirling up behind us as we eased out of town and headed west. The fuel and water tanks were full. I had plenty of food, the map was a good one, and my compass worked. With the early sun low behind me, there was no glare, and this could be a critical factor. When the sun was at its highest and then falling down directly before us, the glare could be at its worst. But there were at least another 5 hours before then. If all went well, we could go a long way in that time. The only other road user was a man on a black bone shaker bicycle and his goat that trotted along beside him as if an early morning jog was quite the thing to be doing. Neither seemed particularly bothered that it was a long way to anywhere. The road was fine, and we clicked along at 70 k's. 80 or even 90 would have been fine too, but common sense said, just take it easy. At times on the way south, when all had been going well, it had been temptation to push to the limits. The Paris-Dakar spirit was always dangerously bubbling around on those good days. On some of them, I felt absolutely invincible, and once or twice had scared myself silly. But this was not the time to do anything daft. Besides a lot of skill, the Paris-Dakar riders had support teams made up of mechanics that could strip down and rebuild a bust bike in moments. I had just me. The checkpoints book showed that the last vehicle through had been 2 days before. How had I missed it? The road stayed pretty good. Every so often there'd be a softer patch, but the sunlight would catch the change in texture enough for me to see it and react accordingly. One long soft patch had me opening the throttle wide, and with a series of wild wiggles, the bike and I were through. The gravel continued easily, with only the soft ridges that other vehicles had thrown up from the loose surface giving cause for concern. This was Space Invader time. With my reaction sharpening with each new problem appearing in front, it was actually good fun. The roads in the northern half of Africa had been far harder than this one. By mid-morning, I was halfway across. 2 quick breaks for drinks had been enough to keep me lubricated and release the tension that was there all of the time we were moving. This hadn't been mental stress, but pure 100% every muscle working body stress. I liked this feeling, and sometimes it built so hard and so fast that I hadn't been aware of its energy drain until the end of a ride. But on this particular day, it had made me feel tired during the ride. I put that down to the malaria that I'd just got rid of and got on the road. But for the first time, I was wondering if I'd recovered enough to be doing the ride. It was a pity that there was no wildlife to see, but in the end, my eyes were mostly on the track, so I probably would have missed anything anyway. Time-wise, things were going very well, but the worst section was still to come. However, I was sure now that with common sense, this road was not going to beat me. I rode on looking forward to the buzzing high of making it to Rundu, the first town of consequence on the other side. Movement, other than swirling dust in my rearview mirror, made me take a rare second look. I hadn't been checking my mirror very often, as there'd been too much going on in front to take time out to do it, and anyway, I didn't really expect to see anyone there. But this time there was, and out of my dust cloud nosed a 4x4, fast. I closed the throttle a bit to let him by. Perhaps my angel was having a snooze at that moment, because I woke up 4 days later in hospital. The white glaring lights above me made me think to begin with that I was still out on the road. With sensors just beginning to work, there seemed to be something wrong, but I'd no idea what. Whilst keeping my eyes partially closed, I took a sneaky look at my surroundings. For some reason, it seemed important to look without anyone noticing. Well, it was pretty obvious that it was a hospital. The smell, and then the beds, and the screens around me told me that. But what had happened?
The Lowdown Show is presented by advrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. Into Africa, as well as other books by Sam Manicom, can be found at sam-manicom.com, your local bookseller, or Amazon. In closing words from eBay Motors. Picture this, you're halfway through a DIY motorcycle fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realize you're missing a part. Well, it's okay because you know whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got everything, brake rotors, lights, and tire exhaust systems, whatever you need. And it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers and hoping you order the right thing. All the parts you need at prices you'll love, guaranteed to fit every time. eBay, things people love. Thank you for listening to The Lowdown Show.